Everybody being, of course, those who are here as well as those who might at a later point be listening online as well. First of all, if I could just give a bit of an apology. I rushed out last week. You may have remembered that Jo wasn't well and I'd sort of indicated to her that I wouldn't stay around. So apologies for not having a bit of a chat. I did chat with a couple, but I didn't avail myself of the supper, which I've brought my appetite tonight, so hopefully the supper is to the same high standard that it was last week. I did see sort of quite a few loaves and fishes, if I can use that expression, coming in the door last week. So that's the apology. The other thing I'd like to do is also to thank you very much for the opportunity to be presenting tonight. I'm just hopeful that we might... there it goes, just like magic. So the title for tonight is Psalms for People Under Pressure, a cornucopia of comfort. I guess for those who know me a little bit better than the rest, I do like words. And I was sort of looking for a word that perhaps captured the fact that when we look at the Psalms, we are just presented with just so much. Let me just begin by saying... cornucopia. I'm sure you've heard of it. Does anybody know the meaning? This is the first little question we'll ask. There's a few. Neville, I knew it'd be in your wheelhouse.
I'll give somebody else a chance.
Oh, okay. Clive? Sorry? Never-ending? In a sense, never-ending has got the context there. Yes. Yeah, it's along those lines. Superabundance. Neville, you have done it. That's exactly right. It's all about an abundance. And really that's what I'd like to convey tonight as we go through the Psalms, that there is abundance of comfort that is provided in the Psalms. I guess instead of cornucopia, I was thinking of smorgasbord, because again, that just gives us sort of this idea of a huge spread or perhaps buffet. And indeed, that's really what we want to look at tonight. Instead of just focusing on one particular psalm, what I'd like to do is to do a bit of a perambulation through the Psalms and to just pick out a couple of key verses, which to me just speaks so much of the comfort that the Psalms actually provide for us. Perhaps just to, in a sense, bring some closure to what we've been trying to address. And I've sort of taken the liberty because back in July, I looked at a couple of Psalms and I've looked at a couple of Psalms on this particular occasion as well. And so in Psalm 34, we looked at a number of key elements. Psalm 34 is a psalm that's, I think, very, very familiar with us. It speaks about the angel of the Lord encamping around about us. It speaks about, all the fears that we have in this life. Well, God can address all of those fears. It speaks about the fact that, animals might suffer deprivations and hunger, but you know what? Those who fear the Lord will not lack any good thing. It also, permeates with this thought that God sees, he hears, and he delivers. In a sense, that's faith. And we want to really pick up that particular aspect as we look through a number of the Psalms tonight. The second of the Psalms that we looked at was Psalm 126. And you recall that was in the time of Hezekiah. The Lord has done great things for us. And so we explored in a sense that with God, nothing is impossible. And we think about Hezekiah, and we're going to sort of look at a couple of Psalms tonight that Hezekiah actually penned, or that were penned in Hezekiah's time. And again, we're going to see emerging from those particular Psalms this fact that we need to have confidence in God. No matter what the problem, no matter what the challenge, the issue, the magnitude, it doesn't matter. If you think back to when we looked at Psalm 126, we sort of reminded ourselves that one of Hezekiah's problems was that he had 185,000 Assyrians to deal with. And so we said that God can deal with those sorts of problems. And regardless of whether our challenges, our problems, our pressures, our issues, regardless of whether on a scale of 0 to 185,000 Assyrians, and I reckon that captures most of the challenges that we would face, God can amply detail or deal with those particular problems. So in other words, we can take comfort from the fact that our God is powerful and that there is nothing that can stand in his way. Again, that's going to emanate from the Psalms that we look at tonight. And then last week we looked at Psalm 32. Largely we wanted to sort of speak about this element of prayer. Again, that's going to permeate our thoughts tonight, that when we start to look at the Psalms are prayers and they're expressions of confidence that God was working in the individual's life, that he would continue to work with them, and the fact that you could cast all your cares, your burdens upon the Lord, that he was a refuge, that he was a stronghold, he was a shield and he was a buckler. Those are the thoughts that emerge from the Psalms. We perhaps touched to some extent on the importance of forgiveness bringing true joy, and we're going to expand on that with the consideration of one of the Psalms tonight, just to sort of look at this aspect of how important it is that we have forgiveness with the Father. And indeed, if that's perhaps one of the challenges that we're facing, on the pressures that we're facing, maybe we think, look, I'm just not worthy. Again, we'll see there's a couple of Psalms that just, in a sense, that elevate us. We're going to look at one where it speaks about being taken up out of the mire. Maybe that's how we feel, that sometimes we're in the bog, we're in the mire. But the good thing about the Psalms is the Psalms actually give us enormous strength and courage and comfort. And you know what? The thing, and we've said this before, God, in preserving the Psalms in the canon of Scripture, this is not something that we can sort of look at and say, well, that was fine for Hezekiah, that was fine for David, it was fine for Asaph. They were men of faith. What we read in the Psalms, we have preserved for us instances of individuals who were faced with trying circumstances. What's preserved for us is, in a sense, a workbook that we can go to. We can draw comfort because it's the same God who's working in lives today as he worked in the lives of individuals some 3,000 odd years ago. That's, I think, the strong lesson we have to take from the Psalms. The God that we worship, it's the same God. The God that demonstrated forgiveness, the God that demonstrated power, that forgiveness, that power has not waned. It's the same comfort that we can derive as did the writer of the particular Psalms. So what I propose to do tonight, and some of you might want to turn up some of these Psalms, I've got around about 15 Psalms, and just in case you're being concerned, we're only going to pick out just a couple of verses from each of these Psalms. And I think these particular verses that I've picked out, to me, when I read them, I derive enormous comfort. I read these words and I say, well, look, this is God operating in somebody's life, and this is how they viewed the circumstances that they were faced with. Yet what they were able to do was to have a faith. They were able to have a resilience that if God was with them, then nobody could be against them. So we're going to begin our journey by looking at Psalm 3. Now, you might care to have a look at Psalm 3 and some of these as we go through. Again, one of the things that we will discover as we go through is the fact that Psalm 3, as it indicates, it's a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. Now, when we start to look at the Psalms, what is interesting is that there's between 8 to 10 Psalms that David pens when he's fleeing from Absalom and the rebellion that took place. Now, that particular rebellion, I was trying to sort of quantify the actual time. It's around about a 12, perhaps 18-month period of time. Yet here we've got David, and there's a number of these Psalms that we're going to look at, that all have been written or penned at this particular point in time. Now that I find is remarkable, that in sort of a 1 year period, David is constantly beseeching God. And again, as I say, when I think about that, I think, well, it's just a reinforcement that no matter how great David was, a man after God's own heart, yet the solution was not provided by God immediately. He had to pour out his heart. And again, let's just have a look at Psalm 3 and look at the comfort that comes from this, the reassurance. But you, O Lord, and I'm reading from verses 3 to 6, and I'm reading from the New Living Translation. I hope people don't mind the NLT. You're a shield around me, you are my glory, the one who holds my head high. I cried out to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy mountain. I lay down and slept, yet I woke up in safety, for the Lord was watching over me. I am not afraid of 10,000 enemies who surround me on every side. So again, the context, he's fled from the issue of Absalom and the rebellion. And at this particular point, he takes comfort from the fact that God's with him. He hasn't, of course, come back as king, so he's still, in a sense, in isolation because Absalom is reigning. Yet, what does David say? He could take comfort, and he felt that he was safe, that he was secure. And look at that, there's 10,000 enemies. There's a huge, huge number. David is beset with problems and challenges. Yet, what does he say? I'm not afraid. I think if you or I were to be in that particular position, most of us would be very afraid. Hey, even if you aren't, I'm prepared to say that I would have been under those circumstances. And I think if we're honest with ourselves and we start to look at what was taking place, if you think about whenever there's a rebellion, when there's sedition, etc., the ultimate outcome is often that somebody loses their head. Somebody dies. Well, we know the outcome, and it wasn't David. David took comfort from the fact that everything was in God's control and that he could sleep. I woke up in safety. I think for most of us, we would be fearful. And if you think about some of the challenges that we face in our lives at different times, we toss and turn. The magnitude of this particular problem, perhaps we read a psalm like this and we read, in fact, there's 2 chapters in 2nd of Samuel that deal with this whole time period of Absalom's treason. And we read through those very quickly. But as best as I can determine, we're talking about maybe a 12-month, 18-month period. Easy for us to read that. But David had to endure. And Psalm 3 is the legacy of that particular time period. Psalm 16 is the next of the psalms that I would like to look at. Now, I'm acutely aware this is a messianic psalm. We know that from Acts chapter 2, verses 26 to 28. And there's a number of things that you could take from this particular psalm. So in putting the heading, companionship with God, really what I've wanted to do is to just focus on the particular verses that I've identified. One could equally say that this was a psalm that was speaking about the hope that we've got. You won't permit your Holy One to see corruption. That's, of course, what Peter takes up from Acts chapter 2. But again, let's just take what's said. And this is, by the way, this is what we call a miktam. And the word miktam actually means covering. And it has the idea behind it, of course, for both protection and also by extension to atone for. So there is sort of a number of differing layers of meaning we could perhaps attribute to this psalm. But again, let's pick up verses 1 and 2. Keep me safe, O God, for I have come to you for refuge. I said to the Lord, you are my master. Every good thing I have comes from you. Just think about that. Every good thing I have comes from you. That's a really powerful acknowledgement. I think sometimes in our own lives we don't always give God the acknowledgement that every good thing, everything that we have, comes from the Father. In a sense, we are stewards for God's property. Yeah, the cattle on 1,000 hills is what the psalmist in another psalm actually said. Hey, they're all God's. Everything that we have, it's God's. And this is what the psalmist here is actually saying. Every good thing. But think about these next words. I know the Lord is always with me. Here's a question that perhaps we need to ask ourselves. Do we know that the Lord is always with us? Do we think that the Lord is always with us? Again, we're going to come, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but right to the very end, the final psalm I want to look at is Psalm 139, because Psalm 139 makes that abundantly clear. We should see it. We are in a relationship with the Father. We should see it, and we should know that God is always with me. I will not be shaken, for he is right beside me. That's how we need to view the circumstances that we face, that it's not us by ourselves. We have a relationship with the Father. Our baptism into Christ brought us into that relationship. And over a period of time, as we walk as disciples, that relationship, the bond of that relationship needs to be growing stronger and stronger. And we need to get to a point, as the psalmist here could say, he's right beside me. I need to see God sort of, in lockstep, we might say, with myself. No wonder the psalmist continues, my heart is glad and I rejoice. My body rests in safety. To me, I look at those, they're soothing words, aren't they? That the psalmist could actually say, look, I know that I've got this great relationship with the Father. Because I've got this great relationship and he's right there beside me, my heart's glad. My heart isn't fearful, my heart is glad. I rejoice and I rest in safety. I'm not in turmoil, I'm not awake, but I'm resting. Why? Because of the relationship, the companionship that we have with the Father. Coming across to Psalm 18. Now, Psalm 18 is an interesting psalm because this is a duplicate of 2 Samuel chapter 22. Now, 2 Samuel 22 is actually the penultimate chapter that is dealing with David's life. So, in a sense, what we're being told here in Psalm 18, this is perhaps a psalm that was written right towards the very, very end of David's life. In a sense, David is looking back, he's reflecting upon everything that's happened to him. And here's the summation. Here's what David actually says when he reflects on what's taken place in his life. He says, I love you, Lord. You are my strength. And again, I think that's powerful in itself. David was a mighty man. A mighty man of valour. We know that he was a fierce warrior. But the acknowledgement from David is that the strength that he possessed, it was not of himself. The strength came from God. And again, I look at those words and I think, hey, that's just so powerful. It really does need to be a case that at all times we need to acknowledge God's strength. It's not of ourselves that we can do anything. It's God's strength. It's God's power working in us. That's what gives us the strength. Look at how he describes God. He says, the Lord is my rock. There's absolute stability. That's really what David is saying here. My fortress, my saviour. My God is my rock in whom I find protection. He is my shield, the power that saves me, and my place of safety. Think about all of those positives that just emanate just from those particular words. David actually sees God. God's the one who's providing all of this strength. God's providing him this place of safety. But as part of being in that place of safety, there is salvation. God is the one that saves us. I called on the Lord who is worthy of praise, and he saved me from my enemies. David had plenty of enemies. When we start to think right throughout his life, there were plenty of enemies that David had to face. There were plenty of circumstances that a lesser man perhaps would have wilted under in having to deal with. But David, upon reflection, says, you know what? It was God who saved me from my enemies. He's not sort of saying, well, I was able to do... Everything comes back. It's God. God's in my corner. If God's in my corner, then in a sense, David is saying, well, look, I want to demonstrate gratitude for what you've done to me. God arms me with strength and he makes my way perfect. Think about that. God arms me with strength. And you know what? God arms us with strength as well. That's the same thing that can be available to us. Remember Paul, when in 2 Corinthians he speaks about the fact that on 3 occasions he beseeched the Lord that the thorn in the flesh might be abated or ameliorated. And what was the Lord's response? The Lord's response was, my grace is sufficient for thee. And Paul then goes on to say, well, you know what? As a result of that grace, I'm strengthened. That grace strengthens me. We have that same grace available to us. It's that same grace that strengthened Paul. It can also strengthen us as well. I think we need to demonstrate gratitude for deliverance, and God does deliver us. Whatever the challenges we face at different times, it's perhaps important that we just sort of step back and we acknowledge that it's not so much ourselves, but it's what God has done for us. Give God the credit. God's the one who has brought us the actual victory. Psalm 20, I don't know whether the Adelaide, do you actually sing this particular hymn? This is a hymn that was composed by Talitha Burney. So at Hyde Park, we've got an appendix. I know you've got an appendix, but this is one of the hymns that is, I'll say, a bit of a favourite. It does sort of, I'd say almost once a month, once every 6 weeks, this one is utilised. Is this something that you're familiar with? No? No? Could I just give a recommendation if you are looking for a very, very good, solid hymn to add, composed by a Christadelphian, lovely hymn. Just look at the words here. And really what this is, and instead of reading Psalm 20, what Talitha has been able to do is she's been able to extract what's the key message that comes out of Psalm 20. You'll gather, of course, just by reading this, and if you've got to Psalm 20, you'll see that it's a battle psalm. It's about somebody going off into battle. But listen to these words, because they extract, as I say, that the key meaning. I pray the Lord will listen when you are in distress. I pray the God of Jacob keep you safe. May he send you help from the sanctuary and come to your rescue from Mount Zion. May he remember your gifts and be pleased with what you'll bring, and in all of your ways may God be with you. Then you will win the victory, and we will shout for joy, lifting our banners in the name of our God. Give the King the victory. Lord, answer our prayers. Lord, answer our prayers. I am certain, Lord, that you'll save those who love you. Save them with the strength of your hand. Some people put their trust in the strength of their own might, but we will put our trust in the Lord. And those that trust in themselves will be brought to their knees, but we will rise up and stand firm unto the end. Again, if you've sort of just been looking down at that particular Psalm 20, I think you'll see that this just captures very nicely the sentiments from that particular psalm. Very, very powerful, and perhaps I'll just go back to the previous little slide. I pray the God of Jacob. And that's most important, that the psalmist actually says that it's the God of Jacob. And our minds, of course, go back to the time when, of course, Jacob wrestled with the angel. Esau was coming. And of course, we know what the Genesis record indicates to us, that the sinew or something was touched on Jacob's thigh or his leg, and as a result, he could no longer run. He had to rely upon God. And that's really what this particular psalm is also providing encouragement to us, that it may be a case that we can't do something. Maybe we are hobbling, as Jacob did from that particular point on. The God of Jacob can keep us safe. Again, just that reinforcement of the idea that it's not about ourselves, it's not about our own strength, but it's upon a reliance that God is able to save. As I say, Psalm 20, that the music, if you've got Spotify, which I'm sure some of you will have, or if you've got, just do a quick Google for Psalm 20 and Bernie, you'll be able to play that particular hymn. And I think once you play it, you'll really appreciate the words and the music that Talitha has put together. When you speak about comfort, I guess you've got to speak about Psalm 23. It would be remiss not to speak about it. What's interesting, until I'd sort of started to look at Psalm 23, I was always under the impression that this was perhaps a psalm that was written early on in David's life. And perhaps it was sort of, we know the story in 1 of Samuel, where David had slain a lion and a bear that came up. And you sort of think of that imagery, and I thought, oh, look, this will be around about the time when he slays Goliath or thereabouts. Well, surprise, surprise, this again is a psalm that was composed when he was fleeing from Absalom. Now, what, as I say, gives the thought away, if you go down to the final verses, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Now, if you go to 2 of Samuel 15:23, we won't necessarily look at that, but that's something you can do in your own time. It's a case that David crossed over the Kidron. And in Hebrew, Kidron is shadow. And so many commentators are actually saying, in a sense, there's a little bit of a play on words that David is actually speaking about when he writes this particular psalm. I think arguably this would be the most well-known of all of the psalms. And even though it's so well-known, I think it does us well just to sort of take on board what's the sentiments that come out. Think about this: the Lord is our shepherd. And indeed, the Lord should be our shepherd. In the New Testament, what does Jesus say in John 10? He says, I am the good shepherd. Peter takes it up in 1 Peter, and he says that Jesus is the chief shepherd. And the writer to the Hebrews in Hebrews 13 speaks about the great shepherd. So this concept of a shepherd and us sort of following is something that finds its ways in both Old and New Testaments. Think about what the shepherd does. He makes the sheep lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. And maybe what's happening in our lives, it might not be still waters. Maybe it's a case where there's upheavals. But this particular psalm actually says, well, you know what? If we're following the shepherd is going to ensure that there is a stillness. There is not going to be turmoil, it's going to be still waters. There's a restoration of our soul that's spoken about. He leads me in paths of righteousness. Why does he do that? Why does he lead us in paths of righteousness? It's for God's name's sake. That's why it's done. Everything, it starts and it finishes with God. Even though the psalmist says, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and you know what, there's sort of an inevitability about what the psalmist is saying, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And you know what, that's perhaps for us. There is, as I say, when I read that, I look at it and I think, well, what's being conveyed is that in our life, It's inevitable that perhaps we will walk through the valley of the shadow of death. We will face circumstances, we will face calamities, we will face problems, challenges, issues, which at that particular point in our life we might say, this is like the valley of the shadow of death. But here's where the real comfort, I think, kicks in, because David goes on to say, I will fear no evil. Why? Because God is with him. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Again, I take those words, and I think we have to sort of take these words with a degree of literalness. We need to look at these words and say, this is speaking to us of the calming influence that the Word of God and that God's power can provide in our lives. That there is a calmness that should pervade us, whatever the circumstances. And I know, look, there are many brothers and sisters, indeed there are many outside of the household who face challenging circumstances. And, I'm certainly not wishing to be dismissive, and I'm not wishing to say I understand. In fact, there are people who have had to deal with challenges that I'm in awe as to how well that they have actually coped. And I can only come to the conclusion, certainly for those within the household, that they've been able to draw comfort from the fact that they are not alone, that God is with them. And that to me is the comfort that we have to take, whatever the circumstances of life. We have to take comfort that God is with us and that all things are working together for our good. We have to do that. Our final slide is going to sort of bring that, in a sense, to a culmination, that we have to view that all things are working together for good, whatever those circumstances are. That's Psalm 23, and again, a time of Absalom's conspiracy. What about Psalm 27? Well, we know very little about Psalm 27. And this is also one of the things I'll say too, that with many of the Psalms, we know so little about them. They've been preserved for us, but we don't always know the background of the Psalms. And Psalm 27 is one of those. It's in the Psalms, but we know so little about it. But the writer says, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war rise against me, yet I will be confident. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. Again, I look at Psalm 27. What's it actually saying? Well, it's actually saying that in a sense that God provides help, consolation, encouragement for us today, but that also extends into the future as well. And that's really the message, I think, from Psalm 27. That's the relationship that we have with the Father. It's a relationship that has started with our baptism, and it's a relationship that continues right through to the kingdom. But we need to sort of look at it, whatever, though an army encamp against me. Think about that. Again, the psalmist is saying, look, the magnitude of the problem almost appears as though I should be overwhelmed. An army, I'm up against an army. Maybe at different times you feel that you're up against the impossible. That's really what the psalmist is saying. But you know what he says? I'm not going to be fearful. I think most of us would be sort of saying, I'm overwhelmed. Think about Elisha's servant. Remember, they were in that little village, and all of a sudden the Assyrians came around and surrounded them. And of course, Elisha's servant, it's in 2 of Kings, I think it's 2 of Kings 6, Elisha's servant says, oh look, we've got this whole army, what are we going to do? And what's Elisha's words? Elisha's words are, he prays, he said, Lord, open his eyes that he might see. And of course his eyes were opened, and right around about there was just a myriad of the hosts of angels. So whilst we don't necessarily, in fact we don't live in a day of open visitation like that, nevertheless the same protection the same issues, the same challenges, we can take comfort from in saying that God is still active. God is still there. And that's what the psalmist says, that, hey, even though you might be faced with this enormous problem, what we need to do is to not be fearful. We need to be confident in God's ability. If we want to sort of paraphrase, yet I will be confident, that's faith. That's faith that God is with us. It's a bit like Daniel's three friends, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. Again, we know the story. And, of course, they didn't bow down when all the musical instruments sounded. And they had confidence. They said that our God whom we worship, they say, He can save us. But they also gave God, in a sense, when I say that the out, but even if He doesn't, we're still not going to fall down and worship this particular image. Again, that's a demonstration of faith, and that's how we have to see things, that even though there might be just this huge issue, this huge challenge, we have to have confidence that whatever the magnitude of the issue, the problem that we're facing, that God is able to solve that problem. That's what Psalm 27, I think, is saying to us, that we need to take courage. Our hearts need to be uplifted. The importance, though, is we need to wait. It's not on our terms, but it's always on God's terms. We sometimes have to wait. Our timeline is finite and we want things to be solved immediately. But in the Father's will, there's, in a sense, He's not dictated by time. He controls time. So He's not measuring things the same way that we do. Psalm 28. When do you reckon this was written, based on when some of the other Psalms were that we've spoken about? Psalm 28, when would you think? Yes, Absalom's rebellion yet again. This is what Psalm 28 is actually looking at. And again, we won't focus so much, but verses 3, 8 and 9 perhaps just provide some level of reinforcement that it is during Absalom's rebellion. Praise the Lord, for He has heard my cry for mercy. The Lord is my strength and shield. I trust Him with all my heart. He helps me and my heart is filled with joy. I burst out in songs of thanksgiving. Again, we read these words and I look at this and I ask myself, as I'm sure you do, is it a case that we trust God with all of our hearts? Do we perhaps sort of say, yes, God, I acknowledge and I've got some trust, but you know what, I'm going to work on a plan B. When we place things in God's care, we don't need to look for a plan B. God is the plan A right through to Z. That's how we need to view things. It's God is where we place our confidence and our trust. We don't need a plan B when it comes to God. But what we do need to do is we need to trust Him with all of our heart. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge that I face in my life, that you have to trust God with all of our heart. Notice David says, I burst out in songs of thanksgiving. Again, this is in the midst of a rebellion. We've said that there's perhaps between 8 to 10 psalms. There's uncertainty in David's mind, largely, as to whether he's ever going to come back to be king or not. And he writes just so many psalms at this particular point in time, but they're expressive, that what he's doing is he places the confidence in God and he gives God thanksgiving. Here's another question. Do we give God thanksgiving whatever the circumstances of life? Paul could say, give thanks in all circumstances. That's a challenge, giving thanks to God in all circumstances. It's not just the great times, but it's also in the times where we might feel chastened, that we might feel overwhelmed. We need to give God thanks at all times. Psalm 31. Again, when's Psalm 31 written? Well, scholars suggest again this is a psalm that's written around the same period with Absalom. So again, here's just another psalm that comes out. Do you ever feel this way? My life is consumed by anguish. David felt that way. Here's what I do like about the Psalms as well. David actually expressed this. This is David's words, my life is consumed by anguish. Here's a question that we perhaps can ask ourselves. Do you go to the Father in prayer and say, my life is consumed by anguish? Remember last week we sort of spoke about the importance of developing a relationship with the Father by prayer. David's really literally pouring out his heart. You know, I'm in anguish. Yeah, that's how he says it. And my years by groaning, my strength fails because of my affliction, and my bones grow weak. You know, this is somebody who is absolutely racked with pain. Yeah, really, is in not a good state at all. But he comes around because he goes on to say, but I trust in you, Lord. I say, you are my God. And I think that's the key. Because David saw God as his God, my God. And that's really, as we sort of wait for Jesus to come again, that needs to be what we're trying to do. Our relationship with the Father must be developing so that we can say it's not somebody else's God, it's not Neville's God. You know, it's not my wife's God, it's not somebody else's God. It's my God. It's the relationship that we have. That's what's going to sustain us. It's my God. There's a closeness, a nexus, a connection that comes. Look at how David then goes on to express it, because if we have that relationship with the Father, what's there also a realisation? My times are in your hands. So in other words, we recognise that when we have this relationship with the Father, that it's in the Father's hands. Everything, it's within his orb. It's within his periphery. He's the one who's taking care. It's not as though everything's haphazard. It's not just time and chance that's happening, but there's a realisation that those in Christ, then our lives are not just our own, but God is in control. God is active in our lives. But nevertheless, David still prays. He says, deliver me from the hands of my enemies, from those who pursue me. Let your face shine on your servant. Save me in your unfailing love. And we can be thankful for God's unfailing love. That's his mercy. His mercies never fail. Jeremiah couched it in terms of new every morning. That's how he looked at the mercies of God, that they were always renewed every morning. But Psalm 31, it's all about the commitment that we need to have. You know, God can just do so much. What we bring to the table is our commitment, our faith to God. We acknowledge that he can. We know that you can do this. And in faith, we need to believe. Psalm 33. God's steadfast love, which we've just alluded to in Psalm 31. We wait in hope for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. In him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in his holy name. May your unfailing love be with us, Lord, even as we put our hope in you. Again, the measure that comes out, it's all about the hope that is provided for us. That's what Psalm 33 tells us. What time am I supposed to finish? I just looked at my watch. Am I supposed to finish in 5 minutes?
It's about 8:32.
What time do I need to finish, Leon? Tell me.
Now.
About now? About now? I've sort of lost track of time. I apologise wholeheartedly for that. I will go through things at a rapid rate from now. Psalm 37, God will not forsake his saints. Again, I think this is a wonderful psalm. What's it actually telling us? It's saying that we've got a glorious hope. We've got a glorious future. That's something, no matter what the difficulties we are facing now, what we need to sort of look at is it's all before us. You know, what does Paul say in 2 Corinthians? He says that whatever afflictions we're dealing with now, he says that they're momentary. They're light afflictions in comparison to the eternal weight of glory that shall be given to us. I was going to look at Psalm 40, but I'll go through Psalm 46. This is a favourite, Psalm 46. This is actually a psalm that was written in the time of Hezekiah. So when Sennacherib came up and all appeared to be lost. So this is a psalm that's written by Hezekiah. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of trouble. And I think it's worth focusing on the fact that he's very present. It's not as though we worship a God who is distant. Yes, we know he is in the heavens above, but he's everywhere. God is everywhere present by his Spirit. He's not distant, he's close. He knows the challenges. And look at what the psalmist here, what Hezekiah says. It doesn't matter the magnitude of the problem. You just imagine 185,000 Assyrians that are knocking on your door. In fact, they're trying to knock the door down. And Hezekiah can confidently say, well, it doesn't matter. I've got confidence, I've got trust in God. God is my fortress. It's not so much the rammed earth walls that I've got that go around the city. It's God who is providing this particular fortress. Let's look at Psalm 91. This is an interesting one because this is a psalm of Moses. So Moses did compose a few psalms, but again, these are words that I think most of us would know reasonably well as well. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust, for he will deliver you. And again, that's the positive we need to take out. It's not a case of maybe. The psalmist here says he will deliver you. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge. Again, there's some sentiments that are expressed there of like the eagle, what the eagle can do, and that finds its way in the Old Testament on many occasions. You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day. Interestingly, this was known as the air raid psalm by brothers and sisters in England during World War II. So I was reading Brother Dudley Firefield's book, and he actually says that this was a psalm that gave enormous comfort to brothers and sisters in London in particular, that they would not fear the terror of the night. So they took that personally, what that particular psalm is actually saying. I might just go. Psalm 139, I think, is really the psalm that, this is the final psalm that we'll have a look at. God knows us and is with us. And again, this is a paraphrase, and I've taken this from the Purple Worship book, but it draws very nicely what this psalm is all about. It speaks about the omniscience, the omnipresence of God. God is everywhere. God has known us. And again, this is another lovely hymn that was composed by Talitha Burney as well. O Lord, you've searched me and known me. O Lord, you know my thoughts. You know my actions and my words. You know each day I live. If I fly away on the wings of dawn to the sky or the depths of the sea, you will be right there. You will show the way. Your hand will hold me safe. I will praise you, Lord, for you are great. You turn the darkness to light. O search my heart and lead me to the everlasting way. Your hand will hold me safe. They're just they're wonderful words. And again, it's a paraphrase of Psalm 139. Wonderful psalm is Psalm 139. Well, time has gone, and I apologise for that. But I do just want to conclude with a quotation from Brother Dennis Gillett out of his book, God Governed Life in the Psalms. Because I think, in a sense, what Brother Dennis has been so masterfully able to achieve is to say that when we look at our own lives, when we look at our circumstances, sometimes we can feel as though we are overwhelmed. We sometimes might even say, well, does God even care about my problems? And maybe you've had those thoughts at different times. But I think these words by Brother Dennis just put everything into perspective for us. Brother Dennis says, and we'll leave these as the final words, we sometimes speak of accidents and catastrophes, and it's right that we should, for all are subject to the laws of the universe. Whatever happens to us happens to other men, but it happens to us in the realm of God's purpose. It happens to us with his knowledge and in the orbit of his will. Romans 8 and at verse 28. And whatever is permitted, be it ever so perplexing, is permitted so that ultimately it may save and do good and never do harm and destroy. Why is that? On the authority of Peter and by the ministration of the Holy Spirit, he careth for you. To me, I think that is just a wonderful expression. So whatever circumstances we are faced with in our lives, I think what Brother Dennis has been able to powerfully sort of extract is to say, we sometimes might feel, why me? Why is this happening to me? What we need to acknowledge is that, as 1 Peter says, that God cares for us. We might not know the answer now. It might be perplexing and it might appear as though it's difficult and it's challenging, but we can take comfort from the fact that God knows all and that God is working in our lives and all things work together for good. Thank you.